Welcome to A News. I'm Umar Taslim and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. In today's episode, Daily Sabah's editorial coordinator, Dr. Mehmet Çelik, will be discussing the top political developments from the region and beyond. In the second half of the program, we'll be talking about the state of the American economy and China's response to the growing trade war with political analyst Javed Rana. But before we begin our discussions, let's take a look at this news report.
For weeks, the family had been on the move as Israeli troops had forced them from home during a military raid that has displaced tens of thousands of Palestinians across the occupied West Bank. After finding shelter in a wedding hall, they were told to leave again.
لحد الآن احنا مش عارفين وين بدنا نروح. يعني هينا قاعدين تيجي يحكوا لنا اطلعوا وبدنا نطلع وين بدنا نروح؟ رح نقعد برا قبل ما يدبرونا وين نروح نقعد برا نضلنا برا يدبرونا في بيت يدبرونا بمطرح الله أعلم لسه إحنا مصيرنا مجهول وين بدنا نروح مجهول لسه.
The grandmother is one of more than 1,500 displaced people in and around the northern city of Tulkarem who are being pushed from schools, youth centers and other venues because the people who run them need them back. Many say they have nowhere else to go because Israeli forces destroyed their homes. Shelters were overcrowded while people slept on floor mats with little privacy, and dozens at times shared a few toilets and a shower.
Welcome back to the program. Dr. Mehmet, welcome to the program as well. It's a pleasure to have you. So many interesting topics to talk about today, Dr. Mehmet. But firstly, I want to discuss the case of Rumeysa Öztürk, who was detained on the 25th of March by ICE. Now, reports in the U.S. media are saying that she is being blamed by the right-wing media, and they are criticizing her heavily for her involvement, which is a false allegation as well, in terrorist activities and supporting Hamas. Now, the State Department has said that the Trump administration has provided no evidence. So tell me, Mehmet, why is the media portraying Rumeysa in such a sense?
Well, right now there's actually two things in the United States that go, in a way, parallel to each other since the Trump administration has come to the office. One is the anti-migrant position, and the other is the U.S. administration's position on the pro-Palestinian movements or pro-Palestinian protests or anybody that actually criticizes what Israel does in the occupied territories. These two things are going hand in hand. And the reason why I'm saying that there is parallels between the two is that both actions towards the other, on the one hand, the migrants, and on the other side, the pro-Palestinian individuals in the United States. Judicial processes say that the administration's actions against either the immigrants or those illegal immigrants in the United States, as well as the pro-Palestinian individuals, they're not very, for the lack of a better word, they're not very on par with the judicial system. So it actually has triggered a tension between the judiciary as well as the judiciary and the executive branch of the United States system. On the other hand, we know that since October 7, 2023, anybody who has criticized any actions of the Israeli government in the occupied territories, they have been labeled as anti-Semitic. Whether they support a terrorist organization or not, this is not really the case. But the actual case is that there is a limit to freedom of speech. There is a limit to freedom of association and press, as well as academic freedom in the United States. For anybody who criticizes Israel, for anybody that says what is taking place in the occupied territories in Gaza is a genocide and United States should not be supporting that, has been labeled as let's say, for the lack, the quote-unquote pro-terrorist or anti-Semitic. And we see Trump's actions against Harvard, for example. So, of course, the media that supports the Trump administration's actions against these two groups, either pro-Palestinians or the immigrants, they will play into the hands of the rhetoric by their coverage of these events. Of course, it's one thing to have a policy on this issue, but it's another thing to have a blanket solution that will target every immigrant and label them as a gang member, or everyone that is criticizing Israeli government, anyone that is criticizing U.S. support to Israel, and label them as pro-terrorist or terror sympathizers. The U.S. justice system is now actually saying that there is no evidence support. They have, the State Department said they have no evidence linking Rumeysa to a terrorist organization as such. So now we see that there isn't, when it comes to making sure that everything is done legally, protecting the individual's rights, the individual rights that are protected by the Constitution, when we see that those are being violated very clearly, both in case of immigrants as well as the pro-Palestinian individuals. I think the right-wing media, not just in the United States, but elsewhere around the world, is being, in a way, I think, put in a position where they can actually build and establish their narrative based on a very critical issue, and that is labeling everyone that criticizing Israeli actions, Israeli genocidal acts in Gaza as anti-Semitic.
Mehmet, I was researching about this issue, and I've seen some very important public figures and right-wing media channels calling Öztürk a cancer that's embedded in our society. And they're saying that she must leave. And then some other people have also said that she has been staying in the U.S. for so long. So what sort of an effect would this give to other students who would want to study or who are applying to study in the United States? What sort of a message does this give out to them?
Well, I think this is not just a case against Rumeysa Öztürk. The aim of such incidents is to instill fear in the eyes of those who want to publicly criticize, those who want to academically criticize, those who want to criticize Israeli actions or the U.S. support to Israeli actions in the media, for example. So the public gatherings in the public arenas are there. They're trying to instill fear in the eyes of the individuals who wants to support these initiatives so that they can limit that public outrage against these events. The aim is not an individual. We cannot diminish this to just Rumeysa. And Rumeysa is a case, but the actions against those who criticize Israeli actions, those who criticize U.S. support to Israel, whether they're in academia, in media, as simple individuals, the aim is to make sure that they instill fear in their eyes so that they don't practice their democratic rights against this atrocity that is taking place. The aim is not just to deal with this one single case. We cannot single out Rumeysa's actions. There's other students who have been deported or who have been detained, who have been facing these allegations just because they have this pro-Palestinian position and they're criticizing Israeli actions against the Palestinians in Gaza.
Mehmet, another important topic for our agenda today is Syria. Now, there have been reports that Saudi Arabia is intending to pay Syria's debt, which amounts to $15 million to the World Bank. And Jordan is being used by Qatar to supply gas to Syria. Now, I want to ask you, Turkey is also a part of Syria's reconstruction. Turkey has said that Syria belongs to Syrians. But now, since these Arab states are being involved, I want to ask you, is this to get leverage over Syria, or are they trying to control the new Syrian government financially?
Well, first of all, we know that Syria has a debt to World Bank, and because of the crisis over the past decade or so, there is a need for rebuilding the whole nation, basically, whether institutionally or in terms of the physical infrastructure. And there's no cash in the bank. There's no cash in the safe when it comes to new Syrian administration for them to be able to use this cash to reconstruct. So it is very natural that they seek help from outside, as they are also facing sanctions by the Western countries, particularly the United States. So due to these sanctions, they're not able to get a lot of cash so that they can help rebuild. There is a pause right now due to humanitarian issues on these sanctions. But nevertheless, I think to build a future for Syria, you will need that cash. You will need that supply of energy. You will need the trade routes to be reopened, and that trade relationship is to restarted between the Syria and the neighboring countries. Because for infrastructure, you need reconstruction. For economy to be enlivened again, you need trade to be acting. You need energy there. Of course, for all these, you also need security. So it is one thing that, we can. It is one thing to say that some countries are trying to get leverage over Syria, but of course, we should know that even development aid doesn't come without a political agenda. That is part of international politics. Nobody helps the other just for the sake of helping and for a good deed. This is a reality in the international relations. Nevertheless, the country needs this now, and they have no other option but to seek some of the regional actors, including Turkey, including Qatar and other Gulf countries and Saudi Arabia, so that there is that rebuilding process can actually begin. I think how much of a leverage the countries can get, or they will be able to demand, that is something that is between the Syrian government and those states. Nevertheless, political influence over Syria is something that everyone will try to achieve. I think the key point here is that whether the Syria's sovereignty will be respected and they will be let make their own decisions as a sovereign state when when there is an aid pouring into the country. I think the key moment here is to make sure that they can, anybody that's trying to or willing to support Syria, they should take Syria as an equal partner, and they should build that future for the Syrian and at a level where the two states will see an eye-to-eye level.
Mehmet, we'll be discussing Iran, but before that, let's take a look at this package about the Iran nuclear deal, and we'll be right back.
In some ways, we're going back to where we were in 2015, 2016. So what was the point of leaving it? I think one of the excuses, and this is just an excuse, right? It's not correct. But one of the excuses he uses is that Obama did not take this to the Congress and the Senate, and so he didn't do due process. Now, this is a president who does all sorts of things, avoiding his own cabinet, never mind the Senate or Congress. But the excuse that some Republicans have used in the past is that this should have been ratified, it wasn't ratified, we didn't know, that kind of thing. The problem remains that having nuclear-grade uranium, or indeed weapons-grade uranium, or indeed a nuclear bomb, is not necessarily sufficient. You need to be able to deliver this bomb. And Iran's Islamic Republic is currently very limited in its ability to use planes good enough to deliver this. So it can use it in coordination, in conjunction with missiles, but it will not be as straightforward. For Iran, the issue of the economy is significant. The currency, even in the last 2 months, has dropped considerably, and it will continue dropping. You don't forget that European countries who remained, at least in name, in the nuclear deal, have not made any economic or trade deals with Iran since 2016, 2017, because of secondary sanctions. So the situation is very bad. For the United States, it's very difficult to tell what exactly Donald Trump thinks. There is this idea that he wants to clear the deck on a number of issues.
Welcome back to the program. Mehmet, the United States is now engaged in talks with Saudi Arabia to provide nuclear technology, but at the same time, it's asking Iran to eliminate its nuclear program. What do we know about this deal, and do you believe that this could start a new arms race in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, we know that we need to put things in the context. Now, Iran is seen as a very strong threat to Israel and the United States' interests in the region. From this perspective, any nuclear enrichment or uranium enrichment by Iran will be seen as skeptical from the U.S. and Israeli side. Nevertheless, the Iranian side says that they are doing this for peaceful purposes, and they have no interest in actually establishing a nuclear weapon, or their uranium enrichment is not with the aim of building, having a nuclear arms program. On the other hand, we know that the U.S. is partnering with Saudi Arabia at many different levels, as it's one of the strategic partners in the region for the United States. Now, they want to have this deal with Saudi Arabia, as per the media reports, but I think that there is this element of 123 agreement, which is about using or supporting nuclear programs for commercial purposes. And Saudi Arabia says that I want to diversify my energy resources or my economy for the 2030 vision, which the United States, which the Saudi Arabia is trying to achieve in the next few years. As part of that, they want to use nuclear program and nuclear energy to diversify their economy and energy resources in collaboration with the United States. Now, we can see that, of course, this can be perceived as a double standard, and this wouldn't be the only area where the United States moves in the region, or in their partnership with regional actors can be seen through a double standard. For example, they support, let's say, a coup leader on the one hand. On the other hand, they can support, they say that they are promoting democracy. So there's a lot of double standards, because the United States' interest in the region needs to be protected from their perspective, and how to get there always is done through a pragmatic relationship or transactional relationship. Of course, they're based on long-term interest. United States regional policy is not a very short-term one, and it has always been a medium or long-term strategy when they take any steps with any of the actors. Nevertheless, I think how this will be perceived by Israel, for example, when it comes to Saudi Arabia acquiring this deal or materializing this nuclear collaboration with the United States, because there's a strong criticism from United States, from Israel as well, in this relationship or this partnership on nuclear program with Saudi Arabia. So time will show. So far, there hasn't been any, of course, substantial outcome of these talks or these negotiations, and how they will materialize. I think eventually it will lead to a new controversy within the region, where Saudi Arabia's employment of this nuclear program will be seen as a threat by other regional countries. And if Israel is voicing that, it should be acknowledged that Iran will also voice that criticism as well.
Mehmet, Europe is always on our agenda. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission's chief, has said that Trump's policies are bringing historic changes. Now, Europe has already been involved in the war in Ukraine. There's migration, there's Islamophobia, there's racism, there's so many other problems. And now, to top it all up, Trump's trade tariffs. Now, what sort of a role should the EU take at this point in order to counter or challenge all of these problems?
The EU has a problem in its society, and that is the political leadership problem. The EU doesn't have very strong leaders. I mean, we don't have the Angela Merkel's, for example, anymore. We don't have some of the key figures. I mean, Emmanuel Macron, French president, is trying to play that role, but even him is not a very strong leader when it comes to establishing this powerful European Union, or even Europe as a continent, that leadership is not there. So this is one of the problems. The other problem is the security problem. I think when it comes to Europe, it has always relied on the United States and the NATO to protect its security interests. But with the Trump administration and Trump moving away from this liberal values that the EU has been supporting internationally, there is that clash of interest or clash of approaches on the new world order. I think in the long term or medium term, the EU must establish a leadership that can actually challenge this approach by Trump in the international arena. On the other hand, the EU should acknowledge that that liberal world order is no longer functioning as it was idealized. As a third step, I think the EU must ensure that it can secure its own interests, and I'm talking about military interests or military security in the international arena. So, I mean, we know that most of the EU's trade is not done with the United States. It's done with other countries, only a small portion of that. But nevertheless, the United States leadership in the international arena and when it comes to the Western world is very prominent. And the EU has been, in a way, protected under the US umbrella when it comes to security. If that is in clash now, if there is a clash between Trump administration or the new United States vision and the EU vision for the world, I think the EU must act on its own terms, and that will come not only on economic terms, but their leadership and security architecture is something that the EU will need if it wants to be an active player in the international arena, same as the United States, as Russia, as China. They are building this new table now where all are playing their own cards. The EU is falling short, for the lack of a better word, in competing with Russia, China, and the United States.
Now we'll be discussing the American economy in depth, and also we are going to target the Chinese economy. We're going to see the measures and the moves that President Xi Jinping is taking in his Southeast Asia tour. But before that, let's take a look at this report.
U.S. stocks ended sharply lower on Wednesday, with the Dow dropping 1.7%, the S&P 500 losing 2.25%, and the Nasdaq nosediving 3%. Speaking at the Economic Club of Chicago, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said larger than expected tariffs from President Trump likely mean higher inflation and slower growth. Powell added that the central bank is waiting for greater clarity before considering policy changes. Stocks added to early declines after Powell's comments. Michael Landsberg is Chief Investment Officer at Landsberg Bennett Private Wealth Management.
I think the market hoped that he would be clairvoyant and tell us where everything's going to go. I think there was talk there that the tariffs were going to affect earnings later on, and he didn't necessarily say how much it was going to be, but obviously the idea that it was larger than expected in terms of the tariffs, I think scared some of the market participants to say, hey, maybe earnings may decelerate more than we're expecting.
Among individual stocks, chip makers plummeted due to U.S. trade restrictions with China. NVIDIA shed nearly 7% after the AI chip leader said it would take a $5.5 billion charge due to the U.S. government's limit on exports to China, a key market for one of its most popular chips. Rival Advanced Micro Devices, which flagged charges of up to $800 million, fell more than 7%. And shares of Dutch chip-making tools giant ASML also dropped 7% after it warned that Trump's tariffs had led to more uncertainty about its outlook.
Political analyst Javed Rana is joining us now from Islamabad. Javed, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Javed, we were discussing about Europe. We also discussed about Europe's economy. Now I want to ask you about the American economy. What sort of a position is the American economy in as of now?
I think it still remains in shambles. U.S. President Donald Trump, when paused all these high tariffs, even then the market could not recover. Internationally, globally speaking, out of $10 trillion losses, by now only 4 trillion losses have been recovered. But that means still there is a $6 trillion US dollars which have been lost during these all what appears to be a chaos in economic policy of the Americans. Now the situation is, it's still a shivering kind of a situation in the USA when it comes to the economy, because Americans still think that they can compete with the China, but I think it looks like that China has left USA and Europeans far behind. At least 20 years ahead is China. Now, China's overall input in terms of the percentage is 30% in the international exports. Its export to the all rest of the world is 30% of the entire world, which means it is only in terms of manufacturing industry. So manufacturing industry's role is 30% to its export. 20 years ago, there was a similar situation, and the edge was with the USA. It was surpassing the world economy with this exports. Now situation has changed altogether. In terms of IT, in terms of high-tech gadgets, mobile technology, cybersecurity, China has already left USA behind. Now, these are the jerk reactions that we have seen from the White House. These are not working, and it is unlikely to work. It has already triggered a kind of a high inflation and recession, and that recession is going to have a chain effect all over the world, because somehow the dollar remains the international currency, and much of the trade still happens in the US dollar. And so far as the international foreign reserves are concerned, most of the countries, they have their reserves in the dollar. And that is the only edge, I believe, which US has prominently has right now when it comes to its economy. But China, again, in a broader picture, it has right now around about $18 trillion economy. US economy is a $24 trillion. And now many of the US economists, they are admitting that within the next couple of years, maybe by 2030, the situation may change. And the Chinese GDP may surpass that of US economy and the US size of the GDP. So I think in that context, it looks like that US has a lot to lose in months to come, in years to come. It looks like that it cannot hold on to the kind of the political influence, the geostrategic influence it has been having on all these third world countries, and more particularly on Europe, because the only vested economic interest that these countries largely have, other than the military, was the economy. Now, by creating trade barriers, by imposing very unrealistic, irrational tariffs, it means that essentially Donald Trump is restricting US economy to itself, to its own manufacturing industry, which has already been shrunk. It's around 8% as compared to 50s and 60s. And largely now the US economy has been focusing on the service economy. But nonetheless, I think when we see the trade balance, still US trade balance has a $1 trillion. $1 trillion, still it is balancing in favor of the US. But again, this very small margin is going to shrink in years to come.
Javed, I want to discuss the funding cuts made by Elon Musk and the Trump administration. Now, when President Trump was inaugurated, Elon Musk started working for for DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And one of the first steps that they took was to halt US aid funding. Now, what that does is the US aid funding was funding many different programs, whether they were related to education or healthcare. And these funds were spread across the entire world. There were so many programs in Africa, in Asia, in less developed countries. Tell me about this foreign policy shift. What sort of an effect will these cuts have on these underprivileged countries?
I think before I come to discuss that very question, but let me give you one of the shade effects what happened in Pakistan. There was a Voice of America's office working in Pakistan. They have done good network here. And all of a sudden, the order came from the Washington that these may be shut down. The next day, no reply would come. Now, this does not happen in the democracies. All of a sudden, it's as if Donald Trump has been behaving like a king. And then I think because this case again landed up in the U.S. court, and then those orders were reversed as a result of intervention by the American courts. But again, the total volume of this U.S. aid all over the world is around $60 billion US dollars. This is not a big money when you look at such a big size of U.S. economy, because with this $60 billion, U.S. was distributing maybe $100 to $200 million to the third world countries like Pakistan. Maybe few hundred U.S. million dollars was spending on health infrastructure, on other humanitarian programs. But again, the amount of the political influence that the U.S. has been generating, and the cloud it had on the third world countries, I think that is going to be shrunk, which means that is a kind of a vacuum which China is going to comprehensively, I think that vacuum is going to be filled by the China with more trade with this country, and certainly that would be largely on the terms and conditions that China would be laying down. China basically develops economic relations with the third world countries, and it does not go into the politics. And that is a beauty of Chinese relationship, though there is a controversy that the kind of the terms and conditions they come up with, that makes the economy a kind of a debt-driven in the long run. But largely speaking, you would not find that the China at least any have a meaningful political influence or objective, but they might have behind the scene. We at this particular point of time can't discuss that. So again, now I think in a broader picture, it looks like that the world is now shifting towards China, because so far whatever the scenes we have seen now in the U.S.-China trade war, China has a clear edge, because by blocking Chinese trade, by imposing now this unrealistic, irrational 245% tariff, which means essentially blocking the Chinese export into USA. And I think that has already been done. And then there were obviously retaliatory 125% tariff by the China. So it means China is not going to deal directly with the USA when it comes to its export. Now it looks like that the China is obviously expanding other avenues in the world within the Southeast Asia, within the Europe, and in the African country. It is going to be expanded, and then there is a Central Asian state. I think Chinese economy is going to expand, and more importantly, countries like Canada, countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, which had some political problems with the China. But I think with the new situation, things are going to change in a big manner.
Javed, like you just said, you mentioned Vietnam and Cambodia and all these countries. Xi Jinping was on a Southeast Asia tour this week, and he visited Vietnam, Cambodia, and Malaysia. And he told the leaders of those countries that China is going to act as a stabilizing force in the region. Do you think that these promises are economically viable? Do you think that China is going to live up to the expectations and the promises that Xi Jinping has been given on this tour?
Basically, I think it's more of the politics than the economy, though economy is obviously has a bigger component, because there were at least 45 agreements that China had during this visit with the Vietnam. And what are the details of those 45 agreements? These are not known. Before discussing those, the impact of those 45 agreements, let's go to discuss when Chinese president said that China would be a stabilizing force. What does he talk about? Basically, he's talking about South China Sea controversy. China has built up artificial islands there, and Philippines, Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia, they have huge reservations, and the Americans have been exploiting it. And then they have also built up an alliance, US-led alliance, and the USA has been giving warning to China that they would not allow building up these artificial islands. But China has basically set up their military bases. It has a long-term geostrategic objective by building up military bases by developing new islands where all these Southeast Asian countries, 4 countries I referred about, they have objection that is a disputed territory. So China is basically giving assurance to these countries that, look, be with us, because this is a altogether different time. USA had imposed initially 80% tariff on Vietnam. And if you go along with these all kind of political disputes, then we are not going to win this trade battle. And obviously, Vietnam is also part of it. I think the similar message was also given to Malaysia. Malaysia has a slightly different situation because Malaysia has is a part of the BRI project, and Malaysia is a country where China has already invested a huge money. So I think now it looks like that Southeast Asian countries are forgetting their territorial disputes with China on South China Sea. And the kind of a loose alliance that Southeast East Asian countries had with the US, that seems to be now breaking up, because China is now giving them an assurance that they are setting up these military bases in South China Sea, not against the interests of these East Asian countries. And China is giving them an assurance that their economic and political and geostrategic interests would be watched. And the real culprit is the US. That is the message that the Chinese president, I think, it looks like has successfully given. But again, now these 45 agreements which have been inked between with Vietnam, between Vietnam and the China, I think this is something which needs to be decoded. And there is a possibility that now China would be manufacturing many products, and part of it, would be manufactured in the Vietnam, maybe just packing. I'm just giving it for the sake of the argument. And then Vietnam would be exporting all those products to the USA, because Vietnam is expecting that these 80% tariff are going to be reduced to the 10%. I think for Vietnam, it is a life and death, because Vietnam has been hugely dependent onto the US market. But in a broader picture, we have to see that Chinese export to the US is 15% of the overall export, which is around 3.59 trillion US dollars. That's a huge figure. Now, all China has to do is basically divert its 15% export, and I think that may include smuggling into different countries informally through back channels, and maybe changing the name of the products, made in Vietnam, made in Malaysia, and it could be in any other country. And then same products are going to be exported to the USA, which is obviously a big economy. So my understanding is that in the long run, China is not going to lose. It is the US which is going to lose, because there is going to be more recession, there is going to be more inflation, there is a more political instability in the USA right now as we speak, and these stock markets are simply stumbling, and I think it will be now very difficult for the American economy to revive in years to come, and we are going to see more chaos in the policy making, though it looks like that Donald Trump has blinks by pausing all these tariffs except for China. But I think kind of the insanity that he has, he has got a very arbitrary approach, and then the below the belt language he has been using in trade war against China, and talking about the world leaders, the the way they are approaching them, they are simply making a request. But again, his choice of word is obnoxious. So again, he is also normalizing a culture of an obnoxious language, not less than a president of the USA. So again, all the negative optics are now lies with the USA, and
Javed,
it looks like there is
I would like to
going be a
apologize to
shift.
you, but we're running out of time, so we'll have to end the program right now. Thank you for your analysis. Dr. Mehmet Çelik, thank you for being on the program as well. It was a pleasure having you today. And as every week, we'll see you next week as well on Tuesdays. That brings us to the end of today's program. As global dynamics continue to evolve, we'll be here to break down the developments that shape our world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.